Hello and welcome to Funbikes TV. Today we're going to go through the steps on how to assemble the MXR 50cc petrol mini dirt bike. Place your box upright on the floor. Cut the banding and open the box. Once open, remove the packaging from the box. In the top of the box you will find the front wheel with the mudguard attached and a small box of parts. Once the packaging is removed, you can lift the bike from the box. We recommend you get help for this part. In the small box of parts you will find the front number board, a mixing bottle, the handlebar pad, the front axle with spacers and bolts, a breather pipe, a bag with various nuts, bolts and fixings, your maintenance toolkit, the manual, and a sheet explaining how to start the bike. First we're going to connect the handlebars. You need the two top handlebar clamps, the two longer and two shorter bolts, and two spacers. Lift the handlebars into place, resting them on the bottom handlebar clamps. There are notches on the handlebars showing where they should sit in the handlebar clamps. We recommend applying stud lock to all the threads during this process. Place one shorter handlebar bolt through the top handlebar clamp. Then, place the handlebar clamp over the handlebars, with the bolt slotting through the bottom clamp facing the front of the bike, then loosely tighten. Do the same with the other handlebar clamp. Next, bring the ignition switch up into place. Slide one of the longer bolts through the ignition switch plate. Then, slide the spacer onto the bottom of the bolt. Apply stud lock to the thread. Slide the bolt into place through the upper and bottom handlebar clamps with the spacer sitting on top of the clamp. Do the same on the opposite side. Then, using a 6 hex key, tighten all 4 bolts evenly. Make sure the handlebars are in the correct position before you finish tightening the bolts. We are now going to fit the front mudguard. Using a 5 hex key, remove the bolt from the front and the 2 bolts from underneath the bottom yoke. Then, apply stud lock to the threads of these bolts. Slide the mudguard into place and reattach the 3 bolts, starting with the one from the centre of the yoke. To attach the number board, first disconnect the front brake cable from the brake lever. Feed the cable through the number board, then reattach the brake cable to the lever. Remove the middle bolt from the top yoke with a 5 hex key. Apply stud lock to the thread of this bolt. Put the removed bolt through the top of the number board. Then slide the number board into place with the top bolts going back into the yoke and tighten the bolt. Tidy the cables behind the number board. Now we're going to fit the front caliper to the forks. Firstly, cut the caliper free from the fork. Remove the mounting bolts from the caliper and then apply the stud lock to the threads of these bolts. Hold the caliper in place against the bracket on the fork and then put the top bolt through the bracket and the caliper loosely. Then place the bottom bolt through the bottom bracket and the caliper. Then tighten the 2 bolts using a 5 hex key. We're now going to fit the front wheel. First, remove the nut from the end of the axle bolt and slide off the 2 spacers. Thread the axle bolt through the bottom fork and place one of the spacers on the end of the bolt. At this time, only slot the bolt through the first fork. Bring the wheel into place, feeding the disc brake in between the brake pads and the caliper. Once in place, thread the axle bolt through the front wheel. Align the second spacer between the front wheel and the fork and thread the axle bolt through the wheel, spacer and fork. Once through, apply stud lock to the thread and reattach the nut. Tighten the bolt with a 17 and 14 spanner. To attach the handlebar pad, first remove the cover from the pad. Cut down the centre of the pad, then place it over the handlebars and reapply the cover. Also place the breather pipe onto the fuel cap and thread it down the front of the bike. The rear shock's bottom bolt needs threading through. Lift the rear wheel into place and hold it there with your body. Place the bolt through the shock bracket on the swing arm and the shock. Apply stud lock to the bolt's thread and reattach the nut. Then tighten with a 10 and 8 spanner. The handlebars need adjusting so they are more comfortable for the rider. Firstly, using a Phillips screwdriver, adjust the kill switch so that it is facing the rider. Using a 4 hex key, adjust the levers so that they are slightly angled down and easier for the rider to press. Also make sure the levers are level with one another. Now the handlebars are adjusted correctly, it's time to do a full nut and bolt check of the bike. Using a 5 hex key, check all 4 bolts on the yoke are tight. Using a 5 hex key, check the bolts on the front disc brake. Using a 4 hex key, tighten the plastic bolts on the bike. Using a 5 hex key, check the exhaust heat shield is tight. Cut the cable tie holding the footrest in place. This does snap back, so please be careful. Using a 5 hex key and a 10 spanner, make sure the footrest is tight. Apply stud lock to the threads. Using a 12 and 14 spanner or socket, tighten the rear swing arm. Apply stud lock to the threads. Using a 5 hex key, check the frame cover is tight and the retaining spring for the kickstand is also tight. Using a 17 spanner, make sure your kickstand is tight and apply stud lock to the threads. Using a 5 hex key, check the chain guard bolts are tight. Using a 17 and 14 spanner or socket, check the rear axle is tight and apply stud lock to the threads. Using a 10 and 14 spanner, check the top bolts on the rear shock are tight and apply stud lock to the threads. Using a 5 hex key, check the rear disc bolts are tight. Cut the cable tie holding the footrest up on the other side, and again, this does snap back, so please be careful. Using a 5 hex key and a 10 spanner, make sure the footrest is tight and apply stud lock to the threads. Using a 5 hex key and a 10 spanner, make sure the fuel tap is tight. Using a 5 hex key, check the engine mounting bolts are tight under the bike. Using the 5 hex key, check the exhaust manifold. Using a 13 spanner, check the nuts and valves are tight on both wheels. You need to adjust the front caliper. The 2 bolts on the far side adjust the pad on the rear of the caliper. The one on the centre adjusts the front pad. Adjust these so the pads are close to the disc brake but do not rub when spinning freely. Spinning the wheel and checking the brakes as you adjust. Use an 8 spanner to loosen the centre bolt, and then use a 3 hex key to adjust the position of the pad. Once completed, lock the centre pad off by holding the bolt in place with the 3 hex key and tighten with the spanner. You now need to set the rear caliper the same way you set the front caliper. You have now completed building the MXR 50cc mini dirt bike. I hope this guide has been some help to you. Many thanks for watching, and let the fun begin.